Okay, so something a little bit different for this video. So, a little less than a week ago, a chess YouTuber that I find myself watching quite a bit came up with a challenge that I really liked on his channel. He left it as a bit of a standing challenge for anyone to complete, so I figured I'd pick up the gauntlet and give it a shot. It took me sinking a lot of hours in to finally crack it, but I can say that it was huge amounts of fun. So, I'll leave a link to the original video in the description below, but the basic idea is that we're playing the 250 Elo bot Martin on chess.com, but we have to use a spinner wheel. So when it's our turn to move, we must move the piece that we spin. If we can't, we lose. That means that if we, say, roll a bishop near the start of the game and we haven't managed to move a pawn out of the way to make room for it yet, then too bad, so sad, start again. It also means that you really have to protect at least one of every piece. If, for instance, we lose both rooks and later spin rook on the wheel, then once again that's an instant loss and it's time to restart. The fun of this challenge, in my opinion, comes from what the Martin bot does. He's not against, for instance, just throwing his unprotected queen next to our king to check us. In any other chess situation, of course, you could just go, hey, thanks for the free queen. But in this variant, if you don't land on king on the next spin of the wheel, then that's it, game over. You really have to come up with multiple layers of defense just to try and prevent that from ever happening. Knights I found particularly brutal for this. It's almost like Martin is programmed to use them to check you in any situation he can, and when he does, you of course can't block the check. You have to roll a piece that can either capture the knight, or move your king, which often just delays the inevitable, or again, that's it, you lose. It can also be hilarious to be sitting there with four pieces that can take Martin's queen, and you can't roll a single one of them. He's not defending it, he's busy doing other stuff while you're busily rolling, say, 4 kings in a row and just twiddling your thumbs. That kind of thing actually happens quite a heap in this variant. It's even more painful when Martin decides to go on a pawn rampage. I've had his pawns just slowly zigzagging down the board, taking pieces of mine until he puts me in check, and there's literally nothing I can do to stop it. Anyway, if you like gaming challenges where you're constantly fighting out from under a rock, I can safely say that this is the chess challenge for you. So, some tips and tricks for if you do decide to give this a shot yourself. Some of these will probably be obvious to people, but some may not be. Anyway, to start, Martin himself has a few predictable things of note. Firstly, he'll always defend against a checkmate in one if possible. Considering the wheel, this gives us an extremely low chance of getting an early game checkmate. It's much better to play the long game and take all his non-pawn pieces before attempting the win. Secondly, I don't think he'll ever miss a checkmate in one. This comes up less often, but it's still something to watch out for. You can rely on him doing stupid stuff to some degree, but not in every situation. Thirdly, I don't think I ever saw him miss an opportunity to take my queen unless it was in a possible queen exchange. This makes moving your queen into the thick of things a huge gamble, as moving your queen may not come up again for dozens of spins. And in that time, it's super easy for him to accidentally move a piece into position that he can attack from, and from there, well, you're in trouble. They're probably the big three. Apart from that, I find he treats pawns as almost invisible. This is a really good example happening at the moment actually. So I would obviously like to capture his queen, so to try accomplishing that, I'm just advancing my pawn up to threaten it. I deliberately won't threaten his queen with any other types of piece if I can avoid it, as that makes him much less likely to do a runner. It's the same way I captured his bishop earlier, if you saw that. Just a single pawn is totally Martin's biggest weakness. In my opinion, there might be others, there might be lots of others, but this is the one that I've chosen to exploit anyway. More often than not, he'll just sit there ignoring a pawn for turns and turns at a time. He will eventually move away from a pawn threat, but not nearly as fast as if his piece were threatened by any other type of piece. And lastly, just a little note on openings. So I tried quite a few just to get a feel for what worked best, but the standard king's pawn moving 2 seemed best to me. It obviously releases the queen, the bishop and the king, so we're less likely to lose on our next roll. But the reason I specifically like to move it forward 2 is so that if my queen gets let out diagonally, she can run around on the third rank without being blocked in. You don't want to leave her blocking in your bishop on the second rank. And if she's on the third rank but being kept to one side by a pawn, Martin will often move his queen out and offer a swap, and even if we were to magically successfully get his queen in exchange, it's still a game-losing move for us. Best to give our queen as much safe playroom as possible, as far from the enemy as possible, for as long as possible. I also quite like to watch which bishop Martin releases with his opening move fairly closely, and move a rook pawn forward 2 to try and lure the bishop in. Martin will often move his bishop to the far edge of the board for no real reason that I can see. So if you can have a rook ready to pounce, covering that square, well, every extra chance to gain some free material is something we really want. The first bishop capture is actually also really important, as from then on we can try and keep our king, and any piece for that matter, on the coloured squares which his remaining bishop can't take. One less attack avenue for Martin to just decimate us is one more potential avenue to our victory. I did think about speeding this video up, by the way, but then decided against it. People can always fast forward through if they like. This is me thinking through things in real time. I'm not going to go through every decision I make as, well, I don't necessarily know exactly what I was thinking for every single move. I recorded a lot of hours of chess footage before I got this particular victory, but I do remember struggling with the upcoming pawn move decision. For a 15-minute video, I think I'm going to be deliberating over which pawn to move for like a full minute, so it seemed like a turn I should probably stop and talk about at least a little. Okay, so a different pawn move first, which is a nice obvious one. Can take a knight, so I take a knight, but the next spin is the one that lands on pawn and causes all my indecision. The first thing you might notice is that I'm actually starting to run out of potential pawn moves. I have 3 that can currently move, and all 3 of those I could move forward so far that they can't move again if I choose to. Not a dire emergency yet, but still something to take into consideration before just locking one in to moving 2. So, choice of 3 pawns, what's my dilemma? So if I move either of my pawns that can move 2 forward by 2, it opens up the possibility of Martin doing the diagonal pawn attack all the way down to my back row like I was talking about earlier. This is made even more likely by the fact that he has so few other moves available to him at the moment. My pieces just so happen to be lined up perfectly for such a disaster to happen, so I'd rather not do that. I'm hoping Martin's pawn on the D column moves forward, as it's something I might actually be able to capture with some manoeuvring. His pieces are actually really well defended at the moment, and the longer the game goes, the more chances that something goes heavily against me. So I'm thinking I'd rather not move my D pawn if at all possible, and this leaves my F and H pawn to move 1 as the options I'm left with. If I move my F pawn, I may be able to bring my rook out to play slowly, but to do that I would have to at some point move my rook to F1, leaving yet another setup where Martin could capture multiple pieces in a row with pawns and get to my back line to promote. Definitely not great, so this leaves my H pawn, which is in fact the one that I end up moving, but it still feels like a bit of a wasted move. And the longer I give Martin to do something like move his rook to the back line, take my bishop, and then leave me in a check I can't escape, yeah, I'm just trying to avoid all the negative possibilities as much as possible. Until all Martin's non-pawn pieces are captured, there's really no sitting back or relaxing in the game. And especially now that I've got a game this far advanced, which if you ever give this challenge a shot, you'll understand is really quite uncommon in the scheme of things, I really don't want to let this game go to waste. Okay, so it looks like I didn't deliberate over that pawn move for nearly as long as I felt that I had. Guess time must move differently when playing chess. Other things that are happening though, you probably noticed that I traded off my spare knight for his rook that was almost certainly going to go causing me some grief. I wasn't forced to, but considering his dark squared bishop is almost trapped and it's doing a really good job of locking in his other rook, I thought the sacrifice was worthwhile to take out his only real offensive piece and buy myself some time to bring my other strong pieces to bear. They're starting to feel a little left out of the action. Speaking of being left out of the action, I was thinking of including a bunch of funny attempts I had at the end of this video, like a kind of a bloopers reel, but looking at the speed of this one game, I think they might make it go just a tad too long. There's a bunch of ones where I need to spin like anything except a king for a checkmate, and of course then go spin a king, or lose one of my knights, then later spin knight, not realizing my other one has no legal moves left as I've accidentally blocked him in all directions. Lots of stuff like that, which just makes you go, ah. Anyway, if people want to see them, do let me know. I'm sure I can stitch together a second vid without too much trouble if there's actual interest, though I suspect this video will be pretty niche interest-wise already. In fact, if you're listening to this part, then I suspect you're one of the few. I'm actually trying something different for sound this time, so if you are one of the people that's been listening in all the way through, and you've been there going, oh, that sounds good, or that sounds crap, then let me know, yeah? I honestly can't tell the difference, but from comments on my previous vids, some people have very strong opinions on what techniques sound best, and I am happy to accommodate. That's what this experimentation is for. Maybe it made no difference, in which case you can let me know that as well. Never going to figure it out if I don't play around, and this vid seemed like the one to test some new techniques on. Okay, so getting closer to the end now. 2 real pieces of Martins left to capture. I was actually rather pleased with the next one actually. So a little bit of shuffling around pieces first. There's a whole lot of that happens at this stage of the game. But the next piece I managed to capture is his bishop, and I did so the very next spin after he gave me an opening. All too often Martin will offer a free piece and it just sits there for turns and turns while we're unable to capture it until eventually he just randomly moves away again, and it can be super frustrating. But this time luck seemed to finally be on my side and I managed to spin king exactly at the time that I needed to. Okay, I may have called that a smidgen early, still a couple of moves away, but it is coming up. I have to move my queen up to give a little check first, start cornering the king, and finally start getting ready to capture some of those annoying back pawns that have been blocking my ones up forever. Open up a pathway for a possible promotion. A super useful thing to have up our sleeve in case his rook manages to take one of our important pieces. And there we go. His bishop moves down to take my pawn, and the very next spin I roll up king. So satisfying. So, one big piece left on Martin's side. If you're not used to this variant, you may be sitting there going, oh, well, it's all in the bag from here. But actually, there's still more than a few ups and downs left to happen. This is far from my first attempt where I got this close, but every other time things just fell apart at super speed at this stage. You'll be able to see hints at the kinds of things you have to deal with shortly. I do manage to make it through thanks to a fair amount of luck, but yeah, things go far from smoothly. So after this king move, where I'm completely torn between making a dash for safety and using the king to stop a possible pawn promotion, I had a look and there's 16 moves left to go. And in that time, I feel that quite a lot happens actually, quite a lot jammed in. Of course, that may just be because I was so invested in this game at this stage, but even so, it's far from anything that one could call safe chess. Just quickly, while I think of it before the shenanigans begins ramping up, you may have noticed that I decided not to edit out the unnecessary parts of the footage this time, website addresses and the like. It was partly due to slackness. This is a very quick and dirty, spur-of-the-moment type video compared to a lot of the ones that I've made in the past. But also in my mind, I justified it with the logic that there's no point making a video that responds to a challenge if I don't get it out there while the challenge is still at least somewhat fresh in people's minds. And saying that out loud now, yeah, there's a good chance it was just total slackness, isn't there? Ah well. Okay, time to see what kind of dangers can crop up when it looks like you're nearing the end. From this point on, I really did get insanely lucky. So it starts with me just moving my rook into the corner thinking, oh great, look, pawns in a line that can't cover each other, let's get them. Of course, the first thing Martin does in response is move one into a position where he threatens to do the double diagonal take and promote. Luckily for me, the very next thing I spin is another rook, so I managed to dodge that bullet, only for Martin to instantly move across and threaten my knight with his rook. Once again, I get pretty darn lucky and spin up knight immediately, so yet another bullet dodged. I get one turn of relative safety where I can move my queen. Some kind of issue where it wouldn't click here for some reason, which is why it takes me so long. This isn't actually me wondering where to move to. Well, not once I make sure I can't get a quick checkmate anyway. The choice is pretty obvious. Not sure if it was a problem with the site or my mouse batteries or what the story was, but whatever the case, once I do finally manage to eventually move, for Martin's next trick, he's back to threatening my undefended knight again, but this time I'm not lucky enough to get out of the way straight away. Instead, we go back to spinning up useless pieces on the wheel. Well, I guess the king isn't completely useless. He is actually serving a defensive purpose in the area that he's in, but he's certainly not the piece I want to be moving at this stage anyway. This is still Martin though, so he doesn't take me immediately, which was a huge relief at the time, deciding instead to advance his pawn that I'm least worried about. A sneaky pawn move by me past his pawn that's pinned to his king, but now it has been multiple moves, and Martin eventually does take his chance to take out my knight. It's not an instant loss for us. Remember that we don't lose now until we actually spin knight on the wheel, but of course that puts a pretty heavy clock on the game. Certainly not an ideal situation to be in. A couple more useless moves. Well, I'm just wanting a spin to land on rook, but at least the wheel isn't spinning up knight either. I'm really looking for either a quick checkmate or maybe a pawn promotion into a knight if I can get away with it at this stage. Can't play the long game when every spin gives a 1 in 6 chance of outright losing. Of course, the pain isn't over with just yet, with Martin deciding to move his rook into a position to challenge my queen. When I didn't spin queen here, I kind of expected it to just be game over actually. But against all odds, Martin chose not to take my queen for a move, and the next spin I totally lucked out and managed to capture his rook. Not safe yet by a long shot, of course, still very much aware of the fact that if I spin knight I lose, so really trying to figure out the position for my queen that gives me the most different spin options that lead to a checkmate here. In the end, I decided to force his king into the corner so that either the rook gets a checkmate, the pawn moves up and my queen gets a checkmate, or the pawn moves up, the bishop moves up, and then my queen gets a checkmate. I figured 3 possible pathways to checkmate was maximizing my chances there. Sorry there. The third option was, of course, my pawn moves up, my bishop moves up, and then my bishop moves again up to the f6 square for a checkmate. Not sure why I said queen there at the end, but I knew what I meant though. Anyway, a couple of moves later on, and we do manage to actually get one of those checkmates to happen. By the end of the game, I think it's been a grand total of 7 moves since I lost my knight, so we were really starting to push the envelope a little there, but it all worked out in the end, right? Anyway, that's the challenge, so that's the vid. If you've got any questions, do feel free to ask, and I promise to get back to you before too long. Otherwise, good luck with your own attempts if you decide to give it a shot for yourself, and yeah, who knows, maybe I'll see you across the chessboard someday. Till then, see ya.